Hello, everybody. I am here today with my managing partner, Gary Rosen, who is the leader of my law firm and a business leader in the community that has his finger on the pulse about what's going on. And we are joined today with Shirley Arline, a seasoned human resource professional who has her own consulting company, CoWORKS International. Shirley is a great asset. She works with businesses big and small, and she, like us, has her finger on the pulse about the issues that are concerning businesses. What are the kinds of things that you're hearing from your clients about the return to work?
Still quite a few apprehensions about how to manage it in a way that allows employees to remain safe as well as feel comfortable. A lot of concern about the social adjustment and the psychological adjustment of those employees who've been out for quite a while. We have had a significant increase in the request for EAP programs to implement for clients as well as to expand the services of clients who have a number of concerns. Employees have requested about dealing with the challenges of working remotely, trying to balance the social demands of schools as well as telecommuting and having kids maybe home from school, and the mental health impact on employees of the pandemic. That's been a significant request as well.
Yeah, and I found that interesting enough in that study of the employees that were surveyed, 70% of employees want some kind of hybrid model, but 20% of those surveyed don't even want to return to work at all. So how do you manage those sorts of things? And I see Gary laughing. So I'm curious to hear, what you've been hearing. I know you regularly meet with other business professionals, other leaders of law firms. What are the kinds of things that you've been discussing among your peers and some of the issues that you've heard, and how are you dealing with it?
Yeah, it's a bit all over the map, Jamie, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. I regularly speak to managing partners of law firms throughout the state of Florida. So, I am fully anticipating that we're going to have some bumping and grinding as we move back into what will be for us a hybrid work environment with some people who miss terribly the ability to work from home 100% of the time. There'll be some people who are delighted to get back to the office and will come back in the office 5 days a week. But again, I think the majority of the people will fall somewhere in the middle, and we're going to be trying to accommodate that.
Shirley, is that sort of similar to what you've been seeing with the business executives that you've been working with?
Yes, in fact, that's been a response to a lot of the demands from employees themselves. As Gary said so well, so many employees have become very accustomed to and very comfortable working from home, and most have been able to demonstrate that they can work productively and effectively. The other issue with telecommuting is that we're seeing a proliferation of some employees really having a problem socially with being detached from the workplace and detached from their coworkers. So it's affecting them from a mental health perspective because for a lot of them, workplace is their source of socialization. And that again contributes to the demand that we've been getting for more expanded EAP services for employees.
How do you combat? And I do want to talk about EAP and mental health, and we'll get there in a little bit. But one of the things I want to talk about is this idea, and I think, and I'm sure, and I want to hear what Gary's got to say. Part of the reason why there's this desire to kind of go back to somewhere in the middle of this hybrid is because there's this camaraderie, there's this aspect that's really been lost. And although there's a lot of us that have really tapped into our inner hermits where we kind of like being at home and maybe not seeing other people, but there also is a desire for a lot of people who like being social and miss that. And how does that impact a business? And Gary, like I said, I want to hear from you. How has it impacted, at least what you've seen from the firm, and how people interact in a job where a lot of times we do interact with each other?
I think overarching this entire challenge that all businesses are going to face, and our business is facing it as well, is the need to recognize that whatever any business decides to embark upon, with a return to work approach or business model, it needs to be organic. I know as I read everything I can get my hands on about what business leaders are doing around the country in all manner of industries, that there is a wide range, and there are some businesses out there and some large businesses out there that have made the decision that they're going to be fully remote all the time. That would not work for us. And I don't think it would work for most law firms. The managing partners that I speak to works to establish some kind of a culture, some kind of a work environment, and to establish a culture, a work environment, an atmosphere for your employees, staff, lawyers, lobbyists alike. You have to be present. You have to have unscheduled conversations. You have to have an ability to rub elbows with your colleagues and have the ability to exchange ideas professionally and have a certain amount of social interaction in order for people to be comfortable with one another. So, number one, I would say it's critical that whatever any organization does, it be organic and natural for that organization. But number two, we all need to recognize that what we're embarking on now is an experiment. We can't draw hard lines in the sand and say, this is what we're going to do. We figured it all out, and this is the way it's going to be from this point forward, with no adjustments or resilience in mind at all. That's impossible. I think it's foolhardy. And that's the approach that we've taken with every challenge that we have faced from March 11th, 2020 to today. But we're going to have to be open-minded about the prospect of those adjustments in order for us to be able to do what's right for our people and our organization, because we want people to be comfortable. We want people to feel like the organization has, as it always has had, their best interest in mind for the betterment of the organization as a whole, but at the same time balancing certain factors and considerations that we must keep in mind because we're running a business. And so bigger picture issues always have to be at the back of our mind with respect to all of those things. So at the end of the day, we draw it up, we write it down, and then we edit as we go along.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such an important point, is that idea and the concept of fluidity, of flexibility. And I think that's really key, because like what you said, I mean, although we joke around and I think I even have an employer's playbook, but there really isn't a playbook for the pandemic. I mean, for most of us, the vast majority of people don't have.
I wish I had a playbook. And so you're kind of left like every business leader around the country, scratching your head and making it up as you went along.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and that's just the thing. I mean, nobody is really ahead of anybody else. I mean, we're all just sort of figuring this out in real time. And that's the thing. I mean, sometimes you may make mistakes along the way and you have to adjust to figure it out to make it work in the workforce. Part of that flexibility, and I wonder for you, Shirley, if you've seen this as well, because one of the things that at least I keep hearing that's, been a recurring theme is this fear. And, fear isn't one of those things that you can always rationalize, but it is real. And there are people who have fears, whether, it's real or just real to them, about coming back to work. And what is it that employers can do to make employees feel more comfortable?
There are genuine fears among the employers as well as employees about potential exposure. Several employees have gone on record with their employers to say they are anti-vaccine, they refuse to be vaccinated. And the employer then is looking at, what do I do? This is someone who's a valuable employee to the organization. I don't want to expose them to others who have concerns about this individual. What do we do as a solution for this? And that need for flexibility that Gary talked about becomes overriding, and try to accommodate everyone, whether it's a religious preference that may need to be accommodated, someone who has a disability that needs to be accommodated. The other is about the workplace itself. How safe is the office for them to come into? What kind of things have been done But it is a real concern about the potential for exposure in the workplace, and it's become a reason why several employees are resisting having to give up the telecommute and being required to return to the workplace.
No, absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned about the vaccine policy because I've had a ton of questions about whether or not they can mandate it. Only two clients that I could think of that have really taken that approach and just are insisting on vaccination, and they're going to sort of, force everyone toward that herd immunity, because for them, they understand the EEOC has taken the position that, with regard to vaccinations, that unless it's a religious or a health issue, that mandatory vaccination is something that is permissible under the law. But how do you take what we know we can do under the law, but then, like, what Gary was mentioning, that, and I want to hear your thoughts, because I know what the firm's position is, but sort of how you came to that conclusion of, listen, we're going to encourage our employees and it's going to be voluntary as opposed to mandatory, because that's what makes sense and that works for us. So, I mean, Gary, what are your thoughts about that? And also, how do you make the workplace safe for those people who either fall within one of the exceptions or just don't want to be vaccinated?
So I'm smiling a bit because we're governed by a management committee. I'm the managing partner of the law firm, but there are 6 of the members of a management committee that make policy for the law firm. And this issue came up at a management committee meeting, and the conversation was, let's say, lively. There was a wide range of opinions with respect to what the policy of the law firm should be going forward, and it encompassed the full spectrum. Relatively quickly in the discussion, we rejected the notion of taking the mandatory vaccination approach, not because we had any concerns about legal liability or legal issues, because the EEOC has stated very explicitly, very clearly, as you said, that that's permissible. But on the other hand, in every conversation that I'm having with all of our offices and all of our employees, I am very, very strongly encouraging them to get vaccinated. But that I believe that for their own health, welfare, and safety, and for the health and welfare of their colleagues and coworkers, and frankly, for the health and welfare of the entire community in which they live, personally, I feel like it's a civic duty. That's my attitude. I feel like it's a civic duty to get vaccinated, just like stopping at a red light, just like wearing a seatbelt, just like not smoking indoors in a restaurant. I see no difference. And I feel strongly that it's important for people to seriously consider getting vaccinated, and most of our employees are getting vaccinated.
The other concern is that if you have employees continue to refuse to be vaccinated, what do you do in the way of incentivizing those to get a vaccination? Some are offering specific programs to encourage that. Others are providing specific reports for doing so. But that's the most common concern that employees have about returning is, I don't know who's been vaccinated and I don't know who has.
Well, I didn't go as far as the governor of Ohio. We were not offering $1 million lottery for people to get it, but we have opened up a raffle. And there's a $2,500 prize available to those people who've not been vaccinated, who get vaccinated. Their name's going to be entered in the raffle. And there'll be a check for $2,500 given to the winner of that raffle. So that's a positive incentive until the CDC says that this thing is solved and we've somehow attained herd immunity, which I know has come into question as to whether that's ever going to occur. Given the nature of our diverse society and diverse attitudes, and quite frankly, the political environment that we all live in. And if we don't achieve herd immunity, then we may be living with this kind of a challenge for some time to come. And we have to be realistic about that. That's a distinct possibility.
Another trend that we're seeing among clients is that they want to continue the daily temperature check for those employees who are not vaccinated, just as another precaution to make employees who are vaccinated feel more comfortable about exposure to those who are not. So they're continuing with the temperature checks, but it's excluded to those who have not been vaccinated.
It's funny that you say that, because I had a meeting last week with a client. Two of the things that we talked about in our firms doing it, but I think a lot of employers as well, offering paid time off, up to, a certain amount of hours that you will have off from work to go get the vaccine, or if you experience any negative effects from the vaccine. So incentivizing that way, also bringing in somebody to answer questions, from the community that may be in a better spot to answer questions that people may have about the vaccine. So educating, the workforce, and every workforce is different, and then like what Gary said, some of that negative, which, it's not so terrible, but for some of them, it is. I had, that one client that I was talking about, they've had their employees routinely tested for COVID-19, and they have testing fatigue. And, I said, it's like a real thing, like mask fatigue. They have testing fatigue. And one of the managers that I was talking to, was like, I'm so sick of standing in that damn line to go get tested, have that thing on my nose. He's like, I'm done with it. And I said, get vaccinated, and then you'll be done with it. And you can tell all the people who are also in the same position. And it was like a light bulb went off, like, wait a minute, I don't have to stand in line and get that thing, up my nose. Like, the cost reward, like, maybe I will get vaccinated if it means I don't have to keep sticking that thing up my nose.
Well,
so sometimes it works.
Not only is that an incentive, but I got to believe at this point, just about everyone in this country knows at least one or two people, and in some cases, several people who have gotten sick with the virus. And I have to say that I am someone who knows a lot of people who have gotten sick. Fortunately, no one close to me has passed away, but I am well aware of people, acquaintances who have passed away, and people who have survived tell stories about going through hell on earth with their experience with the virus. This is no flu. This is no, sniffle or cold. It is really a brutal, brutal experience. And people I'm close with have gone through it. It's just no joke. And if that's not enough of an incentive for people to get vaccinated, having heard stories like that, I just don't know what is. The bottom line of what people say, without going into too much detail about the nature of their personal experience with the illness, is that they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy. So just imagine how horrible you have to feel over such an extended period of time, weeks at a time, to come away with that kind of a feeling. And if you know people who have gone through it, I got to believe that that's a powerful, powerful incentive to get vaccinated. Who wants to feel like that, and who wants to risk long haul COVID or more serious repercussions?
And employers are using that information to help employees understand the severity of this virus, where there's been situations where employees have coworkers who have been affected by the disease. Some have actually had coworkers who've died, and they've highlighted those. They've tried to make it convenient for employees to get the test and to get the vaccine. As you said, Jaime, allowing them time off with pay to go get testing. I have several clients who actually brought the testing facilities onto their premises to allow employees to get the test right there, so they don't have to worry about leaving to go away from the workplace or interrupting their workday to go get tested. They have the facilities right there, and there's still some employees who push back on the vaccine. So that information sharing is a powerful source, as Gary said, of laying those stories. And we found that that's helped when they know someone or they've heard about someone who has either incurred the illness or has lost a loved one to the disease.
Yeah, no, and sometimes it's really a shift in mindset, because some clients have told me that they've had employees that are younger, and the younger employees are saying, well, I'm young, I never get sick, I'm fine, why should I get vaccinated? And there has to be this educational component to it, because when you hear stuff like that, what they're, and maybe they do know, but maybe they don't, the idea of herd immunity is because you are not just protecting yourself, you're protecting everybody else, and particularly people, for example, that are immunocompromised. And so we're, like I said, not only doing it for ourselves when you get vaccinated, you're also doing it for other people, especially if we're not going to have government mandated vaccination. At what point, who's sort of next in line? It's these businesses that are creating policies and sort of driving some of these other issues that, just aren't going to be, like I said, mandated by government. And so I think it's really important. I think, it's going to continue to be an issue. And, like what you said, Gary, unfortunately, I do agree. I don't know that this is going to go away anytime soon. I really, really wish it would. I think most people do feel that way. I read somewhere that they think that this is going to become more like the, common cold, and that you're going to continue to see it just in various forms for a long time to come. But, what are we going to do about it? And obviously, as it continues to impact the workplace, how is it going to change things? For example, and kind of coming back full circle about some of this other stuff we talked about, recruiting, because there are a lot of employees that don't want to go work somewhere that doesn't have some kind of hybrid model. So, how is it impacting recruiting? How is it impacting retention? What are some of the things you've seen, Shirley?
That has become a big challenge for employers. The candidates are asking about the COVID protocols that are in place at prospective employers. They're setting very specific terms under which they will consider employment with that organization. So I've gotten complaints from employers about the fact that they're losing control of the recruiting process, and it's very much in the hands of the candidate today. They're making demands about, why can't I continue to telecommute? I'm living in another state. I can still do this job. I'm qualified to do this job. Why do I physically have to be in a location that's closer to that locale? They want to know about what other employees have been required to do in the way of vaccinations, in a way of providing information about whether they have been vaccinated or not, what kind of continued testing requirements are in place. It has definitely affected recruiting. From the standpoint of retention, we're finding that many employers are losing employees who have decided to make a complete career change. They've had a chance to be very reflective during the pandemic while they've been at home, and they decided to take a different direction with their careers. And it has not always been advantageous to the employer.
And what about you, Gary? I mean, have you seen, those kinds of trends where people, you had commented that you were just interviewing this morning. Is that something that's come up? What's the workplace look like? Onboarding, telecommuting, and then also retention, because of the impacts of the pandemic, and sort of changed how we do business.
So from a recruitment standpoint, I haven't found it to be a big issue for me. It's certainly a question that comes up in the conversation during interviews. Candidates want to know, what we're doing. Are we requiring everybody to come into the office 5 days a week? Are we in some kind of a hybrid model? And that's information I very transparently share. And I find that the approach that I described to candidates seems to be satisfactory. They seem to be fully willing to accept a hybrid nature of work environment. With regard to retention, I guess time will tell. There's a balance that you have to strike. You have to, as a business, you have to establish a policy, and you need to do your best to implement that policy even-handedly across the board. And the exceptions need to be as few as possible, because once you start making wide-scale exceptions for employees across the board, then those people who are complying with the policy begin to wonder, why am I doing what the firm policy requires of me when a very large minority of employees are not required to do so? Why is that fair? And resentment starts to build, and now you begin to foster a morale problem within your organization. So there's a very difficult balance that's going to be a challenge for us. We want to be responsive. We want to be somewhat flexible for those employees who have special situations and considerations that have to be taken into account. We don't want to lose good employees. But on the other hand, we need to have a policy in place that people see as being implemented somewhat uniformly across the board, so people feel like they're not foolish for adhering to it. I have no illusions about how easy this is going to be. Fortunately, I have a wonderful chief administrative officer who's going to be primarily responsible for dealing with those issues, but I have no doubt that instances and examples of certain people who are going to be asking for certain considerations are going to come to my attention, and I'm going to have to make a number of decisions in that regard. And none of them are going to.
We have seen a number of female professionals and executives with clients decide to leave the workplace because of all the challenges they've had during this pandemic of childcare, homeschooling requirements, school closing, and some ask for a reduced work schedule or for job sharing arrangements. But in many cases, the employers are losing female level professionals that they really value. And they've been struggling with, how do I do this and make it more accommodating for that female as well as others in the workplace who are saying that this is what I require, this is what I need in order to get through the pandemic and going forward, and what I've learned through this process that I require to make the workplace much more comfortable for me to manage. And that has been a disappointment for many of the employees, that there are a number of female executives who made that decision to separate from the workplace has been increasing, and it's a concern.
Yeah, no, and I have, certainly read, studies. There was, and I'm sure Gary's read too, the ABA had a big study that affects, women in the law. And, I think that the pandemic, one of the things, and Gary mentioned, seeing it, a lot also on the staff level, because sometimes issues will disproportionately affect certain people. Like, for example, like Shirley, what you were talking about, things that have disproportionately affected women because they have child rearing responsibilities, because schools have shut down, because daycare shut down, because, I know that even, myself personally, we had a few issues where, my son's in school, but daycare closed down because one of the, counselors tested positive for COVID. And so, well, who's going to get him? Because, I don't have a stop at 2:00. Thankfully, like what Gary said, there's this idea of flexibility and figuring out, what works. So just because you go get your kid, I can remote back on. So it's pretty seamless, but not everybody has that luxury. And so, I think that there will be people that will either, pivot maybe to a different career. But, I think one of the things for me that's really, an underlying issue in all of this, and Shirley, it's one of the things you talked about in the beginning, and I know it's something that Gary's very passionate about. It's mental health, and it's the mental health of everybody, because we'd be remiss really if we didn't talk about it, because I think that how it's going to impact, obviously as we return to work, as we continue to work, how has this affected us? And what are businesses doing to make sure that, employees don't only stay physically healthy, but also mentally healthy? So I want to, talk to both of you, both about EAP programs, mental health, and the things that you're doing and seeing among the community, the things that we're doing to highlight it and to make sure that we keep people healthy physically and mentally.
We've been getting more requests, as I said earlier, for EAP services, and those clients who didn't have EAP programs before have requested that we implement them for them now, because of the kind of demands they've been getting from employees who are struggling with that work-life balance, with all the challenges of being at home full-time with kids, of having other family members potentially move in with them, and trying to balance the requirements of work along with the demands of home, and also having to have a much more demanding role in the schooling of kids because school has been closed. We also find that predominantly with millennials, that they have been much more adversely affected because work is their source of primary socialization. And a lot of the relationships interpersonally have been affected within teams that work very collaboratively together. So leaders who have to manage remote organizations have talked to me about the challenges of the disconnect and the detachment and the lack of interpersonal relationships since the pandemic started among teammates. So where they may have had a high functioning team before, that has been that has deteriorated, and it's affected those relationships employees among each other because of that impact. So we've been getting a lot of demands for those kinds of services to help with the mental health requirements of employees feeling detached, of them feeling alone, of them feeling overwhelmed, of them feeling like they're not very productive, of them dealing with the challenges of having to work in a different way that may not be the best fit for their level of skill, and how to manage all those various challenges.
And Gary, what about you? I know we have an employee assistance program and also a mental health committee. But Gary, you're very passionate about it, and it's something that is really important to you as a firm leader, and something that you obviously have strong feelings about. So why don't you talk about some of those issues and how it's impacted the firm, and what you're hearing from other business leaders in the community about what they're doing?
Sure. So, I mean, you're exactly right. I do feel very, very strongly about it. And let's face it, the legal profession has inherent challenges with respect to mental health. The rate of alcoholism and substance abuse amongst our profession is substantially higher than the population at large. That's been the case for as long as I've been a lawyer, and that's about 40 years now. And I'm sure it was the case before I became a lawyer. It's an inherent challenge of our profession. We face certain stresses that translate into mental health challenges. And I think a law firm is foolish if they don't confront them head on, deal with them, anticipate them, and have policies and programs in place in order to deal with them. We do our best in order to do all of that. Again, as with other things, every organization needs to do what's organic and feels right for them. We try to foster an environment where employees feel comfortable as humanly possible to address their problems with their supervisors or with our chief administrative officer, who is our lead human resources professional at the firm. She's outstanding at this. She's extremely sensitive and is well aware of my feelings on this issue. And we do our best to bring resources to bear, whether they are through our health insurance or through outside resources that we bring to bear at the law firm's expense in order to provide an outlet for people to speak to a psychologist or a mental health professional in order to get immediate help should they be feeling like they're going through a difficult time. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had some employees, not a large number, but we had a number of employees who experienced extreme stress, acute stress. And I'm very thankful that they reached out to our HR department and said, I'm having a problem. And what does the law firm provide, or what resources can the law firm provide for me to address this? And we are readily available to accommodate those people in any way that we need to stem a problem at the outset so it doesn't become a larger problem. And realistically, with mental health challenges, sometimes small problems, if left unattended, can become larger issues and then can migrate into a crisis proportion problem. That is the last thing we want. We care about our employees. We care about their physical well-being. We care about their mental well-being. We want them to be productive for the organization, for themselves, and for us, obviously. And so that's why, in my initiative, we did create a mental health committee. Obviously, Jaime, you're well aware of it. You're one of the members of that small committee. And we're rolling out all kinds of resources for our employees to take advantage of. Most important, as I said at the outset, we want people to feel comfortable to take advantage of those resources. Those resources are wonderful, but they don't do anybody any good if people don't feel comfortable to take advantage of them. So we do our best to create an environment where people know that there's no stigma attached to it. God forbid that people are aware of resources and they feel as though, they're going to be placed under some kind of a dark cloud if they take advantage of them. I would feel terrible if anyone felt that way. These resources are made available for people to take advantage of, to help themselves, because we want them to be well. We want them to get better. So we're constantly trying to get that message out. And I know with your work on the committee with other partners in the firm is a big push for us to get that message out. And I'm sure you could speak eloquently about that yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, starting with a good policy, and I'm sure Shirley, you'll see that with clients that will want a mental health policy, will want to make sure that they have an employee assistance program in place so employees can call and reach out, and that resource is available to them if they need it. And like what Gary said, I mean, what's very important to us as a committee is, and I'm sure Shirley, you'll see, and what Gary knows, there's no one perfect answer. There's no one size fits all. And what one person does to help them lessen anxiety or depression or any of those feelings that they're having, whether it's related to the pandemic and those sorts of anxieties that maybe have just been highlighted because of it, even if they've been there all along, that there are resources available and things that employers can do to make sure that the workplace, at least, for the time when people are working, and maybe even when they disconnect, that they have an outlet, whether it's reaching out to an EAP program, whether it's an app like Calm that gives them the ability to disconnect, whether it's yoga, whether it's, listen, I have an Apple Watch that every so now and again it starts reminding me just to breathe. And every time I look at it, I kind of laugh because I think, well, this is really inconvenient. I don't need to breathe right now. I'm doing something, I'm busy. But it's a reminder for me, you're laughing because you probably have the same thing. It's like a reminder to, take a breath and take a minute and try to reconnect and have that minute of levity that, is really important because, I mean, we all work really hard. I think businesses want to get it right because, like, we've all noted that there's no playbook. But I think this conversation is really important. I think it's one that's going to be evolving and ongoing. And I think a lot of businesses will, hopefully, if they haven't done it already, that they will look into it, that they will invest, in employee wellness. We're happy to be a resource for you. And so I thank both Shirley and Gary for being a part of the conversation. It's always very lively and just feels good to talk about these things, to know that you're not alone, that there are people out there that are sort of doing the same things you are and trying to figure out how to make it work.
Thank you, Jaime. Thanks, Shirley.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Good day.
Take care.